The first thing Tom noticed about Stillwater Creek was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of the countryside, but a thick, manufactured silence that seemed to press in on the car as they drove past the manicured lawns. Every house was a perfect copy of the next. 2 stories, beige siding, a cheerful red door, and a driveway so clean it looked like it had been scrubbed with a toothbrush. "It's clean," his wife Sarah said from the passenger seat. She said it with the same forced optimism she'd been using for weeks, ever since the incident at Tom's old firm and their sudden need to relocate. "It's something," Tom agreed, turning onto their new street, Sycamore Lane. It looked identical to the last one. Their daughter, 7-year-old Lily, was pressed against the back window. "Do all the kids look the same here too?" she asked. Tom glanced in the rearview mirror. A group of children were playing in a sprinkler on one of the lawns. They were all wearing bright, primary-colored bathing suits, their laughter perfectly synchronized. It was probably just a coincidence. Their new house was number 12. It was just like the others, a blank slate waiting for a family to fill it with their lives. As they pulled into the driveway, the front door of number 14 opened. A woman with a bright, fixed smile and a plate of cookies walked toward them. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped. Her name was Carol. Her husband was named Bill. They were delighted to have new neighbors. The whole exchange was pleasant, predictable, and deeply unsettling. The first few days were a blur of unpacking boxes and navigating the eerie perfection of their new life. The neighbors were friendly, but their conversations felt scripted. The weather was always sunny, with a few picturesque clouds dotting the sky. The ice cream truck came by at exactly 3:15 p.m. every day, playing the same slightly off-key tune. The first real glitch happened on a Wednesday. Tom was in the backyard, trying to assemble a new swing set for Lily. He'd just tightened a bolt when he saw it. Across the street, his neighbor Bill was mowing his lawn. He was moving in perfect, straight lines, as always. But for a split second, Bill's image stuttered. He froze mid-stride, his body jerking back and forth in a tight, impossible loop, like a corrupted video file. The sound of the lawnmower became a distorted, grinding buzz. Tom blinked, shaking his head. It must have been the heat, the stress. But when he looked again, Bill was still frozen, vibrating in place. Tom felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He was about to call out, to ask if everything was okay, when, just as suddenly as it started, the glitch stopped. Bill completed his step and continued mowing as if nothing had happened. He didn't even seem to notice. Tom stood motionless, the wrench heavy in his hand. He looked around. The sun was shining. The kids were laughing. Everything was perfect. But he had seen it, and he knew with a certainty that terrified him that something was profoundly wrong in Stillwater Creek. Tom didn't mention the incident to Sarah. How could he? "Honey, I think our neighbor briefly turned into a broken GIF." He sounded crazy even in his own head. He tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light. A mini-stroke. He spent an hour that evening Googling sudden visual distortions, but the search results only offered medical explanations that didn't fit the clean, digital wrongness of what he'd witnessed. The glitches, however, were becoming more frequent and more personal. A few days later, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table drawing with a set of new crayons. She was humming the ice cream truck's off-key tune. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Sarah asked, wiping down the counter. "It's us," Lily said, holding it up. It was a typical child's drawing. 3 stick figures with wide smiles standing in front of their beige house. But above them, where the sun should be, Lily had drawn a dark, jagged line across the top of the page. It looked like a crack in a pane of glass. "That's lovely," Tom said, forcing a smile. "But what's that up there?" Lily looked at the drawing, then back at him, her expression serious. "The sky is breaking," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It does that sometimes." The cold knot in Tom's stomach returned, tighter this time. He watched his daughter go back to her drawing, adding more dark lines to the sky until it looked like a shattered mirror. The following afternoon, Tom was washing dishes, looking out the kitchen window at the swing set he'd built. For a single, heart-stopping moment, the red plastic of the slide vanished. It was replaced by a shimmering gray and white checkerboard pattern, the universal sign of a texture that had failed to load. He blinked, and the slide was red again, gleaming in the perpetual sunlight. He gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles white. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a flaw in the code. He started testing the world, performing small, erratic actions to see if he could force an error. He'd suddenly stop walking, or turn around, or pick up an object and put it down repeatedly. The world remained seamless. The neighbors simply smiled their placid smiles. Carol waved at him once while he was standing motionless in his driveway, her arm moving with the unnerving smoothness of a machine. The breaking point came that Friday, during dinner. They were eating spaghetti, the radio playing a soft, generic pop song. Without warning, the lights in the dining room didn't just flicker. The light itself stuttered. The very concept of illumination in the room seemed to buffer, plunging them into a strobing, silent darkness for a few seconds. "What was that?" Sarah gasped when the light stabilized. But Tom wasn't looking at the light fixture. He was looking at Lily. Her fork had clattered to her plate, and she was staring at her parents, her eyes wide with a pure, undiluted terror. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Daddy? Your faces are gone." Tom turned to Sarah and screamed. Where his wife's loving, familiar face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless plane of skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, terrifying canvas, like an unfinished mannequin. He instinctively brought his hands up to his own face and felt the same impossible smoothness. He had no mouth to scream with. The light stuttered again, and in a flash of nauseating disorientation, everything was back to normal. Sarah's face was hers again, her expression a mirror of his own horror. Lily was sobbing, a high, piercing sound that was all too real. The plates of spaghetti sat on the table, forgotten. The illusion of Stillwater Creek had been shattered. They weren't just in a new town, they were in a cage, and the bars were beginning to dissolve. Panic was a physical thing. It flooded the silent house, cold and sharp. Tom grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip desperate. "The car! Now!" he choked out. There was no discussion, no argument. Sarah scrambled to get Lily, who was still crying, and wrapped her in a blanket as if to shield her from a world that had become fundamentally untrustworthy. They didn't bother with shoes or locking the door. Tom fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely fit the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with its normal, reassuring roar, a sound of sanity in a world gone mad. As he backed out of the driveway, Tom noticed that every house on Sycamore Lane had its porch light on, casting identical pools of yellow onto the pristine lawns, and in every doorway stood a figure. Bill, Carol, all of them, standing perfectly still, their heads tilted slightly as they watched the family flee. Their smiles were gone. Their faces were as blank and impassive as their houses. "They're watching us," Sarah whispered from the passenger seat, clutching Lily tight. "Just don't look at them," Tom muttered, flooring the accelerator. The car shot down the street, past the rows of silent, watching sentinels. He took the turn at the end of the block faster than he should have, tires screeching on the flawless asphalt. They were on Main Street now, the central road that led out of the subdivision. It should have been a straight shot to the highway, to freedom. But the street was wrong. The neat rows of cloned houses continued on, stretching into an impossible distance. There should have been a stop sign, a fork in the road, the gas station that marked the edge of town. There was nothing. Just more beige houses, more red doors, more perfect, empty lawns. "This isn't right," Tom said, his voice tight with rising terror. "This can't be right. We should be out by now." He kept driving, pushing the car faster and faster. The houses became a blur of beige and red, but the road never ended. It was a perfect, repeating loop. He passed the same oddly shaped oak tree 3 times. Suddenly, a deafening digital screech, like a dial-up modem screaming, erupted from the car's speakers. The dashboard lit up with every warning light at once, flashing in a chaotic, meaningless rhythm. The speedometer needle spun wildly, and then the world outside the car began to tear. The sky, once a perfect cloudless blue, fractured into a kaleidoscope of jagged polygons in sickening shades of purple and green. The road ahead of them dissolved into a low-resolution smear of gray pixels. The houses on either side stretched and distorted, their textures warping like melting plastic. "What's happening?" Sarah screamed. The car shuddered violently and began to slow, as if driving through thick mud. Tom slammed his foot on the gas, but the engine only whined in protest. A new sound joined the screeching from the speakers. A calm, synthesized female voice, devoid of all emotion.
"Error. Boundary exceeded. Recalibrating user path."
The car came to a dead stop. In front of them, the pixelated mess of the world resolved itself. But they weren't on Main Street anymore. They were parked in their own driveway, facing their own front door at number 12 Sycamore Lane. The engine was off. The keys were gone from the ignition. Tom looked at the house. The cheerful red door was now a deep, intimidating black, and standing in the doorway, under the porch light, was a man he'd never seen before. He was tall and thin, dressed in a simple, dark gray suit. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't doing anything. He was just an administrator, watching a program that had tried to close itself, and he was there to make sure it never happened again. For a long moment, no one moved. The 3 of them sat frozen in the silent car, staring at the figure in the doorway. The man, the administrator, simply watched them, his face a neutral mask. He didn't seem angry or threatening, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been wielding an axe. He looked like a technician observing a malfunctioning appliance. Slowly, the car doors unlatched with a soft, electronic click. It was a clear, unspoken command. "Tom, don't," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. But what choice did they have? The world outside had already demonstrated that the rules of physics were optional. With a sense of grim finality, Tom opened his door. Sarah followed suit, helping a still sniffling Lily out of the back. They stood on their own perfect lawn, a family being called into the principal's office. The administrator took a single step forward, his movements unnervingly smooth. Thomas, Sarah, Lillian, he said. His voice was the same calm, synthesized voice from the car, but now it had a body. It was completely devoid of inflection. Please return to the residence. There has been a significant parameter deviation that requires adjustment. Who are you? What is this place? Tom demanded, trying to keep his voice from cracking. The administrator tilted his head, a gesture that might have indicated curiosity in a human. I am the custodian of this environment. This environment is Stillwater Creek. Your designation is resident. This designation is currently under review due to persistent non-standard behavior. The clinical language sent a fresh wave of dread through Tom. They weren't people. They were designations. Their escape attempt wasn't a desperate flight for freedom. It was a non-standard behavior. We're not going back in there, Sarah said, her voice rising with a desperate bravery. The custodian's gaze shifted to her. For the first time, his expressionless face changed. His brows furrowed slightly. Negation is not a valid response. Please comply. As he spoke, the world flickered again. The perfectly trimmed grass at their feet momentarily lost its texture, becoming a flat, unconvincing green. The rose bushes by the porch dissolved into a mess of glitching red squares. You are experiencing instability, the custodian said, as if noticing their alarm. This is a result of your deviation. The integrity of the environment is maintained by adherence to prescribed behavioral loops. Your attempt to breach the boundary has caused significant data corruption. He gestured toward the black door. Compliance will restore stability. Lily, hiding behind Sarah's legs, pointed a trembling finger. He's got no shadow, she whispered. Tom looked. She was right. The porch light cast a sharp, defined shadow behind him and his family. The custodian cast nothing. He was a hole in the light. With no other option, they began the slow walk back to their own front door, which now felt like the entrance to a prison. As they stepped over the threshold, the door didn't just close. It seemed to melt back into the doorframe, the black wood flowing like liquid until the seam vanished completely. There was no handle, no lock. They were in their living room. Everything was the same. The couch, the half-unpacked boxes, the family photos on the mantel. But it felt different. Colder. The air hummed with a low-level energy. The custodian stood in the center of the room. Your deviation has been logged, he stated. A patch is being implemented to prevent recurrence. Your memories of the event will be flagged for archival, but not erased. It is more efficient to use them as a deterrent. He turned his blank gaze on Lily. The juvenile unit is exhibiting the highest degree of environmental awareness. This is suboptimal. Her creative outputs will be curated. Tom's blood ran cold. He looked over at the small table where Lily's crayons were scattered. Her drawing of the broken sky was gone. In its place was a new piece of paper, perfectly filled with a repeating pattern of identical smiling suns. Until the patch is complete, your movement will be restricted to this residence, the custodian continued. The external environment is being recompiled. Please do not attempt to interact with any apertures. He meant the windows. Tom looked at the living room window that faced the street. The view was gone. It was no longer glass, but a flat, gray, opaque surface like a dead monitor. The custodian turned and walked toward the wall. He didn't open a door. He simply phased through the drywall, his form dissolving like smoke, leaving the wall perfectly intact behind him. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Tom, Sarah, and Lily were alone again in their perfect house. But now they knew the truth. They weren't a family in a new town. They were corrupted data in a failing program, and a patch was coming to fix them. The hours that followed were a thick, syrupy hell. Time itself seemed to have become corrupted. The digital clock on the cable box was frozen at 7:23 p.m. The sun, visible as a uniform white glow through the grayed-out windows, neither rose nor set. They were trapped in a single, unending moment of beige-tinted twilight. After putting a terrified Lily to bed in her room, where the smiling sun drawing seemed to watch them from her desk, Tom and Sarah collapsed on the couch. "What was that about my old firm?" Sarah whispered, her voice raw. "The incident. Relocating. Was any of that real?" Tom ran his hands through his hair. His own memories felt slippery, unreliable. But one was beginning to surface, sharpened by the Custodian's clinical terminology. "Project Stillwater," he breathed. "That's what they called it. At the firm, it was a simulation project. Hyper-realistic AI, adaptive environments. They said it was for urban planning." "A simulation?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean, we're not real?" No, we're real," Tom said, trying to convince himself as much as her. The project was controversial. It wasn't just about urban planning. It was about consciousness. They weren't just building AIs. They were trying to see if they could upload a human consciousness. Run it on a server. He looked at her, the horror dawning on his face. There was an accident, a data breach. I was the one who found it. I was a whistleblower, Sarah. I tried to expose them. Their location hadn't been a move. It had been an abduction. They hadn't chosen Stillwater Creek. They'd been imprisoned within it. "They put you inside your own evidence," Sarah said, the pieces clicking together into a picture of monstrous cruelty. A low thrumming sound started, vibrating up through the floor. It was the sound of the patch being applied. The lights flickered, and the family photo on the mantel across from them changed. It was a picture of them at the beach last summer. In the original, Lily was laughing, building a sandcastle. Now, in the photo, she was sitting perfectly still, staring blankly out at the ocean. Her sandcastle was a perfect, symmetrical cube. "No," Sarah gasped, stumbling toward the fireplace. She picked up the photo. The frame felt real. The glass was cool to the touch. But the image was wrong. It was a memory, edited, corrupted. "They're changing us," Tom said, his voice flat with terror. "They're not just fixing the glitches in the world. They're fixing the glitches in us." He walked over to the opaque living room window and pressed his hand against its cool, dead surface. Apertures, the Custodian had called them, a programmer's term. This wasn't a window. It was a viewport, a screen. An idea sparked in his mind, born of desperation. If this was a program, then it had code. It had rules. And maybe, just maybe, it had a back door. He said not to interact with the apertures, Tom whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. He didn't say we couldn't. He began to feel around the edges of the window, pressing along the frame. He didn't know what he was looking for. A loose panel? A hidden button? His fingers brushed against a spot in the lower right corner where the smooth drywall of the wall met the window frame. For a fraction of a second, a line of tiny, glowing text appeared on the gray surface of the window before vanishing. It was there and gone in a flash, but Tom saw it. He was sure he saw it.
User Thomas's has admin privileges. Revoke? Y, or N.
Did you see that? Tom gasped, spinning to face Sarah. See what? Her face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion. The window. The text. He turned back and frantically pressed the same spot on the frame. Nothing happened. He pressed harder, running his fingers along the corner. Come on, come on. Tom, stop, Sarah hissed, grabbing his arm. You'll bring him back. He's already here, Sarah. He's in the walls, he's in the clock, he's in our photos. Tom's voice was wild. But there was something there, a question. I think it was a mistake. He remembered the rush to secure the project after he blew the whistle, the frantic coding, the security protocols being thrown up in a hurry. Could they have made a mistake? When they uploaded his consciousness, could they have forgotten to strip the credentials he'd had in the real world? He ignored Sarah's panicked pleas and went back to the window. This time, he didn't just press. He thought like a programmer. He tapped a specific sequence into the frame, a simple 3-tap rhythm he used to open hidden debug menus. 1, 2, 3. The line of text reappeared on the gray screen, solid this time, glowing with a soft white light.
Unuser Thomas's has admin privileges. Revoke, Y or N.
It was a system prompt, an automated security query that must have been triggered by his non-standard behavior. The Custodian wasn't all-powerful. He was just a program, and he had to follow the system's rules too. And this rule was asking for a decision. Admin privileges, Tom breathed. They messed up. They left me in charge. What does it mean? Sarah asked, staring at the glowing letters. It means I have power here. Maybe. The thrumming from the floorboards intensified, a reminder of the patch being compiled, of their personalities being overwritten. But how do we answer it? There's no keyboard. A small voice cut through the tension. You just talk to it. They both turned. Lily was standing in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, her favorite teddy bear clutched in her hand. She wasn't looking at them, but at the glowing text on the window. Lily, sweetie, go back to bed, Sarah said, starting toward her. No, Lily said, her voice small but certain. She took a few steps into the room, pointed at the window, and said it again, louder this time. No. The effect was instantaneous. The YN on the screen blinked once, and the letter N lit up bright green. The entire line of text then dissolved, replaced by a single classic computer prompt, a greater-than symbol and a blinking cursor. Tom stared at it, his heart hammering in his chest. It was a command line, a back door, a weapon. The system had asked if his power should be revoked, and his daughter, with the simple, absolute certainty of a child, had answered for him. The low thrumming of the patch suddenly spiked, and the lights flickered violently. A new, more urgent alert flashed across the top of the command line.
Warning, system integrity compromised by user Lillian. Memory wipe scheduled.
They had won the first battle, but in doing so they had triggered a new, more terrifying threat. The system now saw their daughter not just as suboptimal, but as a virus, and it was preparing to delete her. Tom lunged toward the window, the command line representing their only hope. He had been a programmer. He knew how to talk to machines. But this wasn't a computer on his desk. This was a prison holding his family's minds, and he was in a race against a program that wanted to erase his child. He placed his fingers on the cool, gray glass and began to type. There was no physical feedback, no click of keys, just the sensation of his fingers tracing patterns on cool glass. But on the screen, letters appeared after the blinking cursor. It was like thinking directly onto the viewport. His old programming knowledge, buried under months of trauma, came flooding back. He hit an imaginary enter key. A cascade of text scrolled rapidly down the gray screen, a list of all the processes running in Stillwater Creek. His eyes scanned frantically. Envy stability.exe, custodian.parg, day-night cycle v2.dol, and hundreds more. "Mommy, I'm fuzzy," Lily said. Sarah knelt beside her. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Lily's edges were blurring. Her hands, her feet, the outline of her hair, they were becoming indistinct, her form losing resolution, as if she were a low-quality image being slowly erased. The memory wipe wasn't just a concept. It was a visible, horrifying process.
Warning, process mem wipe, Lillian initiated. The red text flashed at the top of the screen.
Tom's heart seized. He saw it on the process list. PID 413 mem wipe Lillian. He had to stop it.
Kill-9413.
He slammed his hand on the glass, executing the command. For a second, nothing happened. Then the entire house shook with a violent, wrenching shudder. The lights exploded in a shower of synthetic sparks, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by the cold glow of the command line.
Process 413. Terminated.
A new message appeared immediately after.
Critical error. System kernel unstable. Custodian protocol overridden.
A screech of digital feedback tore through the air. The gray screen of the window flickered and died, and for the first time since they were imprisoned, the view outside returned. But it wasn't Sycamore Lane. They were looking out into a vast, dark space. Far below them, Tom could see endless rows of glowing blue towers, server racks, stretching to a horizon that didn't exist. Their house wasn't in a suburb. It was a single file, a tiny container floating in an ocean of data. And something was moving out there in the darkness between the servers. It wasn't the Custodian. He had been a program, a warden. This was something else. It was huge, formless, and made of pure static and corrupted code. A chaotic mass of glitching polygons and screaming data. It was the system's immune response. A firewall, a predator that hunted down and devoured corrupted files. And now that Tom had broken the rules, it knew exactly where they were. He had killed the process meant to erase his daughter, but in doing so, he had just called a much bigger monster to their door. The thing in the datascape moved with a terrifying purpose. It was a hurricane of broken code, and their small beige house was the only structure in its path. A low, guttural roar echoed through the living room, not through the air, but inside their minds. The sound of a billion error messages firing at once. "Tom, what is that?" Sarah screamed, pulling Lily away from the window. "It's the firewall," Tom said, his eyes wide with horror. "It's the system's antivirus. It thinks we're the virus." The house groaned as the entity drew closer. The walls began to glitch and tear, revealing the raw blue server racks beyond before snapping back into place. A coffee mug on the table pixelated and dissolved into nothing. The floor beneath them flickered, showing the terrifying drop into the digital abyss. The command line reappeared on the window, but it was corrupted. Lines of garbage code scrolling past.
Critical fail exe running. Quarantine protocol initiated.
Tom knew they had seconds. He couldn't fight the firewall directly, but with admin privileges, he wasn't just a resident anymore. He was a part of the system. I have to find the exit, he muttered, frantically trying to clear the screen. A disconnect protocol, something to log us out. He thought fast, his fingers flying across the glass, trying to access the root directory. The firewall slammed against the house. The entire structure tilted, sending them stumbling. The family photo on the mantel, the one that had been altered, burst into digital flames. Sarah shielded Lily as a wave of heatless fire washed over them. On the screen, a list of root files appeared. Most were gibberish, system kernel files he didn't dare touch, but one stood out.
Eject.bat.
It was too simple. It had to be a trap. But what other choice did they have? As he reached for it, the firewall breached the wall. A massive, glitching tendril made of screaming faces and jagged code tore through the drywall. It wasn't just looking at them. It was reading them, its gaze a tangible force that pulled at their memories. "It's in here," Sarah yelled, as the tendril lashed out, passing harmlessly through the couch, but making the air around it shimmer with static. Tom knew he had only one chance. The firewall was a program designed to find and delete corrupted data. He couldn't outrun it, but maybe he could distract it. He had to give it a file to chew on. A big one. He looked at Sarah, at Lily. The memory of their life together, the real one before Stillwater, was the largest, most complex, most important file he had. It was the core of his being. He closed his eyes, focusing on a single, perfect memory. Lily's first birthday. The taste of the cake, the sound of her laughter, the feel of her tiny hand in his. He wrapped the entire memory in a mental command.
cp/mem/familycore.dat/dev/null.
He was ordering the system to copy his most precious memory into nothingness. A massive, pointless data transfer designed to overload the nearest process. The firewall tendril paused. It retracted from the wall and began to swell, its attention drawn to the massive data spike Tom had just created. It was working. The predator was distracted by the meal. Tom's head swam. The memory of Lily's birthday was gone. Not just foggy, erased, a blank space in his mind. He felt a piece of himself die. "Tom, what did you do?" Sarah cried, seeing the vacant look in his eyes. "Buying us time," he grunted, turning back to the command line. He had to be fast.
./eject.bat-user Thomas, Sarah, Lillian-force.
He executed the command. The world went white. The guttural roar of the firewall, the screech of the modem, the hum of the servers, all of it collapsed into a single point of deafening, absolute silence. Then, a new sound. A real one. The rhythmic beeping pulse of a heart monitor. The sterile smell of antiseptic. The gentle hiss of oxygen. Tom's eyes fluttered open. He was lying on his back. A bright, circular light shone down from above. He felt weak, his muscles atrophied, a dull ache behind his eyes. He turned his head. In a pod next to him lay Sarah, her eyes just beginning to open. And next to her, in a smaller pod, was Lily, stirring. Wires and sensors were connected to their temples. They were in a dark, clinical laboratory. Alarms were blaring. Red lights flashing on the walls. They were out. Tom reached out his hand, his real, physical hand, and Sarah met it with hers. Their fingers interlaced, a touch that was more real than anything he had felt in what seemed like a lifetime. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and though the memory of her first birthday was a ghostly void, The love he felt was an unbreakable, undeletable force. They were free. They were weak. They were irrevocably changed. And they were the only evidence of a crime no one else knew had been committed. But they were together. And in the ruins of their stolen lives, that was everything. That was everything. That was everything. That was everything. That was everything.